The title of our session is The Role of the Christian Rescuers and of the Zionist Resistors. Attila Pók is going to be our next speaker, who has access to the Vatican archives, and the title of her presentation is Margit Schlachter, or Margaret Schlachter and Rescue Activities of the Holy See. The floor is yours.
Főtisztelendő és excellenciás nuncius úr, excellenciás nagykövet urak, kedves kollégák, kedves érdeklődők.
Margit Schlachter was awarded the Righteous Among the Nations Award in 1969, one of the highest Israeli state honors awarded to non-Jews who saved lives. Several studies on her 1943 Vatican intercession to save the Jews of Slovakia have come to light, but not in the light of all the relevant Vatican archival sources and with mixed conclusions. In the autumn of 2023, under my leadership or coordination, and the 20th anniversary of the Schlachter, the Hungarian Jewry's 20th anniversary was celebrated in the autumn of 2023. And together with the research team formed by a group of Hungarian academic institutions, I and one of the members of the research team, László Karsai, discovered valuable, largely unpublished sources in the historical archives of the Papal Secretariat of State, in the first part of the Pius XII era documents, in the Czechoslovakia and Germania Extracta series. In addition, I found a set of documents related to Margit Schlachter, but which have not yet been published and thus not examined, in the Hungarian series, which, although not exclusively, is also related to the subject of Jewish rescue. These sources were written in Italian, French and German, have been published with footnotes in the recently published Time Window, a selection of records and documents of the Social Brothers from the Second World War, edited by Eva Petrás. These are the starting points for my present lecture. The first group of sources I have uncovered is the 1943 work of Margit Schlachter, who was born in 1884 in Kassa, Košice, on behalf, who worked on behalf of the Jews of Slovakia. And these are from the Czechoslovakian and Germania Extracta series. This was preceded by the deportations from Slovakia in March 1942, from which 60,000 of the more than 88,000 Jewish inhabitants have been deported by October 1942. Following an agreement with Germany, the Slovak government undertook to pay 500 marks for each deported person, while their property, movable and immovable, would be taken over by the Slovak state. From 1940, Schlachter was co-chairman of the Hungarian Holy Cross Association, which had been set up to protect Catholics of Jewish origin, and worked closely with the Israelite Party Office, one of whose leaders, Baroness Edith Weiss, asked Schlachter to find out about the situation in Slovakia, and if she could, try to do something about it. She traveled there between the 25th and 27th of March and negotiated with the head of the immigration affairs to obtain permission for Jewish children to leave Slovakia, who would have been accepted by neutral Turkey, but this negotiation was unsuccessful. In a submission to the Papal State Secretariat, dated on the 8th of March 1943, she also summarized the events of 1942. According to her description, first women aged 17-35 were rounded up, then men aged 16-50, and finally, after a while, all but a few categories. Slovakian Jews were deported to Galicia, Poland, Upper Silesia and Ukraine. Those who were able to work were employed in factories and wool factories, while the rest were confined in concentration camps and ghettos. The Holy See has a vivid picture of the terrible treatment and disenfranchisement they suffered because of their origin. For example, Schlachter wrote the following, and here I quote, It also happened that the lower part of the wagon, where the unfortunate deportees were kept, was filled with lime, and the people locked in died in the space contaminated with poisonous gases, so that 10 to 15 corpses were thrown out every day. A particular painful sight were the children, aged 5 to 17, locked in the wagons, screaming and crying in a choir on the journey to an unknown future. Once across the border, the deportees had to walk another 20 to 40 kilometers, and those who could not stand up from exhaustion were shot down on the spot. Eyewitnesses said that they walked in lines of 8 to the trenches, including mothers with their babies and elderly men held by their companions. There they were shot dead with machine guns and buried in mass graves with the wounded. Many were hiding in Hungary. As soon as they had regained their lost composure, Minister Mack's speech threw them back into the deepest despair. End of quote. As early as 1942, Margit Schlachter tried to intercede on their behalf, both with the Hungarian secular authorities, summarizing her experiences, and with Count Gyula Zichy, the then ailing Archbishop of Kalocsa, chairman of the Episcopal Committee, set up to help Catholics affected by the Jewish law. However, according to Bishop Gladfelder's description, then the episcopate was wary to taking public action because of the serious consequences for Jews and Christians of Jewish origin, and because these events were taking place in Slovakia, that is, in another state. Schlachter could therefore not expect open or forceful action either from the increasingly right-wing-looking Hungarian political representatives or from the episcopate. On the 7th of February 1943, at the briefing of the Hlinka Guard commanders in Rózsahegy, Interior Minister Mack threatened the Jews who had been preserved or exempted until then. And here I quote, "We have begun and will continue to the end the struggle against Bolshevik Jewry from the 14th of March 1949 true to his, Hlinka's idea. Since we have exterminated 80% of the Jews, one of our task is to exterminate the rest. We all know what the 20,000 Jews who are still in Slovakia represent, whether they are baptized or not, whether they have a certificate or not. They are all, without distinction, working against us. Spring will return, and I can assure you that the deportation of the Jews will resume." End of quote. So, they planned to deport the remaining Jews. This prompted Margit Schlachter to intercede on their behalf both with Archbishop Francis Joseph Spellman of New York, who was in Rome and on good terms with the Society of Social Brothers, and with the Vatican. So, as soon as she was informed that Archbishop Spellman was staying in Rome, wanted to get a passport and travel to Rome. And there she spoke to Archbishop Spellman, who assured her that he would do everything possible for those to be deported, but asked for a concrete solution. In parallel, at the Papal Secretariat of State, Schlachter had already sent a memorandum on the 5th of March on the planned deportations to Slovakia. In it, she referred to Minister Mack's speech, in which he mentioned the planned deportation of 20,000 people, half of them baptized, and she asked for the Holy See's help. She said that after the deportations, a new wave of anti-Semitism would be unleashed, which would have a detrimental effect on Christian and cultural life of Hungary. She recalled that in the first deportation, many people committed suicide, went mad, or hid in the forest. Those who were deported had to endure inhuman treatment and died as victims of satanic torture. As Schlachter put it, here I quote, "These facts have made me determined to take a stand regardless of political or racial issues, if for no other official motive than Christian charity and the divine command to help the unfortunate." End of quote. She also explained that she came to Rome in the hope of meeting the Archbishop of New York, who asked him for concrete proposals. She wrote them down and presented them to the Holy See, But as far as we know, they remained on paper, so I'm not going to speak about them in more detail. In the second half of the promemoria, she took stock of the likely consequences. In her view, the lack of active action by the Catholic Church gives the impression to the masses that Christian religiosity is compatible with hatred, with unjust deprivation of the Jews of their unjust rights. In addition, a Catholic priest, Tiso, is assisting in all this, which may cause superficial people to lose faith in the authority of the Church. The Church could, for example, suspend Tiso or excommunicate Tuka. She believes that the churches are being deserted because the religious followers and priests can indulge in these atrocities. She also expressed her fear on the impact of this bad example on Hungary, which is still almost free from the harmful influence of modern ideologies, but according to Schlachter, where the press was already stirring up hatred against Jews. She believed that Hungary entered the war to defend itself against Bolshevism, not to support the Axis war aims. The admission of Polish refugees was proof of this, and that the severing of diplomatic relations with the US was a formality. And these are all references to Schlachter. On the 8th of March, 3 days later, Schlachter summarized the history, the method, and the cruelty of the deportations of the Jews, detailing to the Papal State Secretary the new dangers involved. This confirmed, for example, the forced prostitution of women in Rome, the gassing with lime, the horror of death camps. It was then that she realized the possibility of a loan from the Holy See to the Jews. She also decided to go to Switzerland to ask for help from the Red Cross and to Spain to promote her idea of Spanish-American cooperation to save the Jews. The Vatican had by then already received information about the planned deportations from other sources. Firstly, from the Apostolic Nuncio in Budapest on the 26th of February, it was a letter which was certainly in the State Secretariat by the 2nd of March. Yet, it was not until 4 days later, on the 6th of March, that Bourzier was instructed to take the necessary steps. If the news proved true, so this was the instruction, so if the news proved true, to make every effort to contact the government to rescue them. This was probably helped by the fact that on the 5th of March, he took Margit Schlachter's petition to the Papal State Secretary. So please have a look at the dates. The 26th of February, 2nd of March, and 5th of March. And according to a note made at that time, she gave the impression of being a deeply religious person. So when she entered the building with the petition, the clerk, it was Mr. Bourzier, wrote back on March the 16th. The 7th of March, although there were rumors that the remaining Jews would be deported, it did not seem imminent and no definite information could be obtained from the government. He repeated this brief in a telegram received on the 11th of March. Later, when the Slovakian episcopate's protests were ineffective, he saw the need to intervene and so wrote to Cardinal Luigi Maione, Secretary of State, and felt time had come to comply with the order of the 6th of March. She requested that we receive an appointment from the 7th of April from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There she spoke against the deportation of the Jews. Wojtek Tuka promised her only that the Jews baptized before the deadline set by law, those who were useful to the state and those who had been granted exemption would not be deported. In the end, the Council of Ministers decided to suspend the deportation of 4,000 people, a measure already ordered by the Minister of the Interior. Schlachter was received later by the Pope on the 11th of March. So here you can see the Pope. And her notes say that she informed him, so these are Schlachter's notes, that she had visited him in connection with the case of 20,000 death row prisoners, because that was deportation meant in practice, and the Pope expressed his horror. She promised here to report on the situation of Catholicism in Hungary. She did so in May. Slachta, in this letter to Pius XII on the 15th of May 1943, clearly attributed the stopping of the deportations to the Pope's intervention. And as we could see, so with the help of the officers, she had significant help. And as she put it, here I quote, "I always think with renewed gratitude of the swift and vigorous action of the Vatican in intervening in the matter of the deportation in Slovakia, unitizing the bishops there as a protective wall to prevent the tragedy." End of quote. And the protest letter of the bishops dated the 8th of March. And in her speech to the Parliament on the 16th of April 1947, she recalled that, and I quote, "I myself had the opportunity to see how he, Pius XII, had dealt with the persecution of the Jews in Slovakia. By telegram or telephone, he instructed the 7 bishops of Slovakia to go personally to President Tiso, Čuka, and Minister Mak, and protest against the deportation of the remaining 20,000 Slovak Jews, in addition to the 60,000 already deported. He also ordered a pastoral letter to be read out in all churches in Slovakia, personally signed by the 7 bishops, explaining why the deportation is incompatible with the Slovak constitution and the Christian spirit of the faithful." End of quote. On the 8th of March, Margit Slachta asked again the Holy See to intercede on behalf of Slovakian Jews. And she was told that, and I quote, "Your science can be addressed, since the Holy See has done and will continue to do everything in the interest of Jews, wherever they are the object of hateful measures, and in this case especially in the interest of Slovakian Jews." End of quote. On the 30th, Slachta returned to the State Secretariat again, claiming that the deportations had been suspended according to her information, presumably due to the fact that Jews from Hungary had sent money to the Slovak government. On the 22nd of March, she wrote a letter in French to Giuseppe Di Maio at the State Secretariat, thanking him for the effective action and explaining that she had been informed that 3 weeks had been gained for the Jews, but that she was very concerned that refugees were arriving illegally in Hungary, whose population of 10 million includes 600,000 to 800,000 Jewish citizens, and that the number of Jews could increase significantly, leading to an increase in anti-Semitism. She suggested that the Italian government could accept Jews from certain groups. She also mentioned the American organization Joint Distribution Committee, which could help. The collective deportation of the Jews did not take place in Slovakia in 1943, indirectly due to the intervention of Margit Slachta, but in the autumn of 1944, those who remained could not avoid their fate. In 1943, Margit Slachta also feared the deportation of Jews in Hungary, as she put it, in May. There was also a growing rumor that before the end of the war, a pogrom would be organized in this country to exterminate all the Jews. She wrote to Pius XII because, and I quote, "The English radio has announced that Your Holiness is hastening to the defense of the Jews in every country where their lives and human rights are in danger." End of quote. The spread of racism, neo-paganism, and in contrast, the correct Christian worldview were at the heart of her submission at the time. So this is her submission of May the 3rd. In point 9, she specifically addressed the situation of Jews in Hungary. According to her, the situation of the Jews here, in Hungary, is better than in other countries under German oppression, but the pagan mentality is advancing. Between 1938 and 1942, according to Slachta, 30 laws were passed against the Jews which violated human rights and the spiritual sovereignty of the Church. For example, it was the legislation on marriage. She summed up her experience as follows, and I quote, "It can thus be stated without exaggeration that the self-preservation of the Jews, the security of their property and their lives, respect for their human dignity, and justice for them have become completely precarious, and that all this depends solely merely on circumstances and the good or bad will of individuals." End of quote. She went on to give examples. In the autumn of 1941, at the initiative of the Ministry of Interior, the police deported 15,000 to 20,000 people to Galicia, then under Hungarian occupation, on the grounds that they were in Hungary without authorization, but not only those of Galician descent, but also those who claimed to be so were deported. So, even those who were said to be belong to this were also deported. Schlachta also mentioned the 1942 massacre in Novi Sad, where 3,000 people were shot dead on the banks of the Danube, and the 35,000 convicts who were transported to the Russian war zone for National Labour Service, where most of them starved or froze to death. Schlachta believes that the Pope could mediate to get the government to abolish the laws and decrees that are most offensive to human dignity, to stop the hate crime, and she specifically mentioned Stürmer, and to repeal the marriage law. And Jews could renounce, according to her, could renounce the Talmud. That the Holy See was interested in the report and was keenly concerned about it is shown by the fact that a long Italian summary was for Jews, but it is described as having been dealt with in the Nuncio's report on the 25th of February 1943 already. So, the 25th of February 1943, for example, in which he mentioned that in his opinion the Jewish question had reached a climax, that the government did not, this is the Budapest Nuncio, did not intend to take further measures, the question of church marriage, the fact that Primate Sheredy had spoken out in the upper house against the disenfranchisement of the Jews, and was therefore presumably treated in conjunction with it. The deportation of Hungarian Jews finally took place in 1944. Margit Schlachta stood up for the persecuted not only in word but also in deed. For example, in several memoirs, we read that the converts formed a network to rescue the persecuted after the persecution of Jews in Slovakia. In one of them, there is even a reference to the fact that on one occasion she was badly beaten when they found persecuted people in the house.
Finally, I would like to give an insight, because the Society of the Social Brothers and Sisters, not only she but many sisters took the risk and saved the persecuted. For example, Sára Salkaházi sister, at the 27th of December 1944, as the responsible manager of the Bokréta Street home, refused to flee, and the arrow cross fired her into the Danube with those who could not prove their origin. Or, for example, several other sisters in the Budapest Mother House hid the persecuted in a woodshed. So, and only removing the wood, covering them at night to feed them and to give them a chance to walk. A third example is Sister Rózsa Katalin Pejtl, who did the persecuted in who hid the persecuted in Remetekertváros from 1941 and was awarded the righteous among the nations. From her recollection, we know that Schlachta did not make it compulsory for her to save people, but only as a request. But the sisters courageously undertook it, and their uncompromising commitment is reflected in the book Time Windows, mentioned at the beginning of my talk. It was her network that Marga Schlachta brought together and did her utmost for the persecuted, and indirectly contributed through her courageous words and deeds to the Holy See's swift action on behalf of the people threatened with deportation in Slovakia. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much for this lecture of dramatic power. Judith Molnár is the second lecturer from the University of Szeged, and Q&A is going to be given to you, the chance of Q&A after the presentations. Thank you.
Tisztelt kollégák, kedves vendégek, az előadásom főszereplője,
the main character of my presentation is Otto Komoly, and the main source of mine is his diary. So for this reason, I would like to introduce himself and the diary. My objective is not to show him as a mentor, but to show him as a person who saves lives. And I promise you that I'm going to reveal it for you why Komoly said, boy, you did that wrong, boy, you screwed this up. So first and foremost, let's take a look at himself. Otto Komoly was an engineer according to his training. From 1940, he became the president of the Hungarian Zionist Federation. From 1943, he became the chairman of the Budapest Rescue Committee, the VADA. Before the German occupation, he helped Slovak and Polish Jews who had fled to Hungary to hide and escape. He was an organizer of immigration to Palestine, especially of children. After the occupation, he negotiates on the Hungarian line. Tasks are split in two within the rescue committee, and Komoly undertook to contact Hungarian politicians with good German connections. Béla Imrédi's name came up in the main sense. Rezső Kastner, his deputy on the Budapest Rescue Committee, negotiates on the German line. As a result of negotiations with the SS, Komoly is involved in compiling the passenger list for the so-called Kastner train to Switzerland on the 30th of June. After several months in Bergen-Belsen, the 1,684 people arrive in neutral Switzerland in two parts, including Komoly's daughter, Lea. Thanks to the demand for labor in Vienna, the German line succeeded in ensuring that 15,000 Jews were deported in the last days of June, not to Auschwitz, but to Strashof, where the deportees were distributed as slaves to various jobs in and around Vienna. These transports came from Szeged, Szolnok and Debrecen. And sorry, really, I just cannot resist. I had no chance to react on Dorotya's lecture. For 30 years I've been fighting hard. We should not remember 20,000 people all the time, that 20,000 people were saved as a result of the Kastner-Eichmann negotiations. So this number is true. So the approximately 1,700 people with the Kastner train and the 15,000 people who were deported to Strasbourg. And King of Raimowitz from the Vienna Byzantine Institute, we made a study, a trilogy, which give us details about the story. It was published just recently, so hopefully it's going to give us another boost that we should remember the figure 15,000, not 20,000. The supply of medicine and clothing for these 15,000 people were organized by Otto Komoly. Friedrich Born, the Budapest representative of the International Red Cross, put him in charge of the aid department of the Red Cross from September 1944. The main task of his was initially to transport 500 Jewish children to Spain with 70 escorts, and after the Arrow Cross takeover, to rescue thousands of Jewish children, the protection and the feeding of hundreds of Jewish adults. After the Arrow Cross came to power, he and his Zionist collaborators gave real and fake protection letters to hundreds of Jewish adults and the aforementioned children, and tried to feed their charges, feed them. After the Arrow Cross takeover, he became a member of the Jewish Council, although in March 1944 he wrote in his diary that we do not go to the Judenrat, but this changed by the autumn. So the 1st of January 1945, he was taken away and killed and murdered by the Arrow Cross people. Take a look at his diary. And this is a continuous record from 1934, and in fact it's not a diary in the traditional sense. He divided each day of his office diary in two with a line. The upper part contains entries about his work, what he did, for how long. Because he was a freelancer, so he had to record it as an engineer because he was paid accordingly. And the part below the line contains his private footnotes and his comments on the Zionist movement. From 1939-1940 onwards, the texts on the movements were become increasingly dense. 1944 spring, there is only a line or two above the line, or nothing, and in the autumn the line disappears, leaving only the lines of a man fighting for the persecuted. I'm just showing the example. This is from January 44 and in October 44. In 1944, entries were actually made in the diary from the 1st of January to the 25th of June and from the 10th of October to the 17th of December. The other days are blank. However, a much more detailed record of the period from the 21st of August to the 16th of September had been handed down to posterity by Komoly. Both leaders of Voda, Komoly and Kastner, made detailed notes by hand after their various meetings and then had them typed up by their secretaries. Nearly a month worth of Komoly's notes are known, while only a few days worth of Rezső Kastner's are known. One of the main sources of the Hungarian Zionists' man-saving activities is Attila Pók's diary. The first page of each diary contains a key phrase. In 1943, he wrote, hopefully, quote, "The storm may have passed. How can we stand the unfolding?" End of quote. So here they already thought, they still thought, they never thought of German occupation. Next year, 1944, however, his lines were more gloomy. Never before has the question been so strong, thrust into my mind. Will the pages of this book be filled with my thoughts? Although the Zionists were the smallest organization among the 800,000 Hungarian Jews, numbering about 10,000 during the Second World War, they had the most extensive international contacts. It was thanks to them that thousands of Jews, mostly children, were rescued to Palestine as early as 1939-1943. Through contacts with the Hungarian Foreign Ministry and the Prime Minister's office, they were able to correspond, for example, with Kaja Barlas, head of the Jewish Agency's Istanbul office. After the German occupation, however, these ministerial contacts ceased. The Germans arrested and deported anti-German and or pro-Jewish politicians to Mauthausen, including Aladár Szegedi Maszák, head of the political department of the Foreign Ministry, who forwarded more than one letter from Otto Komoly to Kaja Barlas in Istanbul. On the evening of 18th of March, Szegedi Maszák was still hopeful that, quote, from Komoly's diary, the situation with the Germans would be cleared up in a few days, unquote. And he was arrested in the new situation. Now new relations had to be established, and with anti-Semitic politicians, because they knew exactly what occupation meant for the Jews, deportation to death. And here you can see the map. The train centers where Jews were put into wagons, loaded into wagons, and the train network that was used for deportations. And the schedule itself is shown. So the Kassa, they started off at the Kassa Gendarmerie district, and then the two Northern Transylvanian gendarme districts, that was phase number 2, and phase number 3, the northern part of the country, Miskolc and Székesfehérvár gendarme districts, and the fourth was the Szeged and the Debrecen districts. And the fifth was the rest of the Transdanubian area, and the stage 6
was
the Pest and the surrounding area. So these were the areas where Horthy suspended the deportation. So the 440,000 Hungarian citizens who were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau in just 57 days,
a nyitó előadásában, az a teljes vidéki zsidóságot jelenti.
So that meant the entire Jewish population of the countryside, so only the capital and those who were in the forced labor. Those were not deported. As I have already mentioned, Rezső Kastner started to negotiate on the German line, and Otto Komoly used the Hungarian line to seek out politicians who he assumed had good German connections. But year 1944 presented Komoly and his company with a new situation. Stage number one, after the occupation, during the period of the Stolyai government, they tried to reach out to Béla Imrédi on the Hungarian line, but without success. Imrédi refused to meet them, and we know from the minutes of the Council of Ministers that his only concern about the deportation was the lack of a written agreement between the German and Hungarian states. The main political intermediary with Imrédi was Miklós Mester, State Secretary for Religion and Education. During this period, two results were achieved on the German line. As I mentioned, the 1,700 passengers with the Kastner train and the 15,000 people who were sent to Strashof instead of Auschwitz. Phase number two, as I said it, when Governor Miklós Horthy suspends the deportation of Jews on the 6th of July, and then appoints a new government headed by Géza Lakatos at the end of August, and announces the ejection on the 15th of October. New negotiating partners, both reliable and unreliable for the Zionists, emerge. Miklós Mester, who remains, among others, the leader of the new government, Miklós Horthy for Komoly. A new partner is Albert Berecki, who is the pastor of the Reformed Church on Pozsonyi Street at the time, and on the 1944 summer he urged Protestant church leaders to take public action against the deportation of Jews. He himself personally delivered a copy of the Auschwitz Protocol to Reformed Bishop László Ravasz of Dunamelli. In August, Mester and Berecki were already thinking about how to abolish anti-Jewish laws and decrees and how to persuade Jewish rabbis to stop thinking in terms of revenge against members of the remaining communities.
Hogy a még létező közösségek tagjai ne a bosszúban gondolkodjanak.
New partners include Lieutenant Colonel László Ferenczy of the Gendarmerie and his deputy Captain László Lulai Leo, who are trying to convince Komoly and his company that the concentration is good for them. But for the remainder Jewish community in Budapest, the arguments are not very convincing, since the deportation of Jews from the countryside also began with concentration. It was difficult for Komoly to judge the sincerity of Ferenczy and Lulai, and the two gendarme officers claimed that the concentration of the remaining Hungarian Jews in rural camps throughout the country was necessary to appease the German demands. Ferenczy, as the gendarmerie's liaison officer with the German security police until July, and Lulai, as Ferenczy's aide-de-camp, had just demonstrated their willingness to implement and enforce all Jewish decrees from discrimination to deportation. Yet it seems to Komoly that Lulai can be trusted in August. As far as Ferenczy is concerned, however, he agrees with Albert Berecki and Sándor Török, head of the Association of Christian Jews in Hungary, quote, "We see the situation after a lengthy discussion that he, Ferenczy, is playing a role and that he wants to save himself first and foremost after past mistakes and can therefore be trusted." And after the Erőkross takeover, Ferenczy again played a different role and practically he supported concentration and even the restarting of deportation. During this period, From August, Friedrich Born, the International Red Cross representative in Budapest, becomes one of the main negotiating bodies. So this negotiating process, it could be said that this is hope, period of hope. On the 24th of August, after the Romanians had defected, Horthy did indeed stop the deportation, and following the formation of the Lakatos government, Komoly, with the help of Böhm, began to organize the departure of 500 Jewish children and 70 accompanying adults to Spain. At this time, September, the International Red Cross Aid Department was set up under Komoly's leadership. But on the 15th of October, Horthy unsuccessfully attempts the escape, and this is the third stage in Otto Komoly's life-saving activities and the establishment of his new network of contacts. He wrote in his diary, the government is out of his office, and he took over, he gave the power to Szálasi. So this was the moment up until which Horthy's picture was in his office, and then he said, man, you did that wrong, man, you screwed this up. And on the Hungarian line, the negotiating partners virtually disappeared. Miklós Mester himself was forced into hiding. The mediators for the Szálasi government became the representative of the neutral states, Born in the first place, but Komoly on more than one occasion requested the help of Angelo Rota, papal nuncio, and Raoul Wallenberg and Sons Brits at the Swedish and Spanish embassies. At this point, he is no longer organizing the departure of 500 children, but trying to save the lives of thousands. He is providing them with accommodation, food, and medical care. And here are a few maps. I'd like to show you. One of the maps is where children's shelters are shown. So the maps show how many buildings were rented by the International Red Cross Department A in November 1944, firstly to protect orphan Jewish children, and secondly to feed them, and the large ghetto. The majority of all the institutions were on the Pest side of the capital. Of the 34 children and infants' homes, only 5 were in Buda, and most of the houses on the Pest side were located in the 7th, 8th, and 9th and 14th districts. This grouping was probably the most appropriate given the transport possibilities. The situation was more similar for hospitals, and here this map you can see hospitals. So mostly on the Pest side and due to and in the same districts. And the rest of the maps show the food warehouses. And the last map is showing us the people's kitchens and the locations of those people's kitchens. So the majority of these can be found in the same areas. So all of these institutions and others not listed here, numbering up to 100 in all, had to be kept in constant contact and monitored to ensure that everything was in order.
Let's not forget that the Red Army by this time arrived close to Budapest. Holocaust visits were almost a daily occurrence wherever Jews were suspected. They broke into several children's homes and killed children under the pretext of resistance. From the last days of November onwards, the police constantly transported children and their guards to the big ghetto. During these days and weeks, traffic was life-threatening, especially for a Jew in the capital. If you look at the single day of Otto Komoly, we see that he visited 8 to 12 places a day. And here, let me show you a couple of maps. So here you can see the map of the capital city of Budapest, and if we zoom in, you can see the 8 locations, but there were some locations he visited several times a day that he visited for some reasons, and these include protected houses, his office,
Komoly Ottónak elnézést, Fillér utcában a Bornak az irodája,
Bohr's office, the Spanish embassy,
tehát ezen épületeket, a Sheep utca,
Sheep Street,
a zsidó tanácsnak a Pest-Izraeliti hitközségnek az
There
épületéről van
you
szó.
can see the headquarters of the Jewish community. And I brought you another map. This is the 4th of December of Otto Komoly, and you can see how many locations he visited on this very day. So this is a similar map to the previous one. So he visited various offices, protected homes, protected houses, embassy buildings and other buildings. Most of these trips were made on foot. If he managed to get a car, mainly with the help of Böhm, he used it. If not, he occasionally took the tram. In the final part of my presentation, I would like to introduce Otto Komoly, the person himself, a person who on the one hand risked his life as a Zionist leader for thousands, perhaps one might say tens of thousands. On the other, he was regularly confronted with the fact that his family was also in danger. His brother Lajos was abducted on the 20th of October, and it took more than 2 weeks to discover that he had been taken, where he had been taken. He was brought home on the 6th of November, but the joy did not last long because Lajos's wife Ilonka was taken away on the 10th of November and deported on foot. On the 20th of October, he learned that his sister Elvira had committed suicide 3 days earlier on the 17th of October, and the next day he was informed in hospital that she had died the same day. And he was able to arrange her funeral on her wedding anniversary on the 25th of October. On the 7th of December, after a 3-week delay, he learned that his aunt had died in a Central Jewish Hospital on Western Street. On the same day, he held talks with Raoul Wallenberg at the Swedish embassy, organized food supplies for a ghetto in Pest, and took part in a meeting to strengthen cooperation between the Jewish Council and Friedrich Born. And what he says in his diary, and I quote, "I am very tired, I can hardly follow the negotiations," end of quote. And there is a very increasing number of notes in his diary like that. Looking at his diary with the eyes of a graphologist, we do not only get a picture of his personality, but can also see that the signs of agitation and fatigue become more and more regular. In general, his writing shows him to be an energetic, dynamic person. In addition, the way his letters are led suggests that his that he is essentially characterized by adaptability, tolerance, and a sense of diplomacy. His writing is basically uniform, straight-lined, and he writes above the lines of a diary. However, in the days following the German occupation, and even more so after the Holocaust takeover, there are several days when his writing becomes disorderly. And here, just a couple of examples, some sheets from his diary from the period of the Holocaust takeover, and I also brought you a sheet from October. So his letters almost sit on the lines, indicating a writing pattern in search of support, an unstable mental state, irritability, and impatience. The slant of the letters varies. The letters are of different sizes. There is a dense misprint. The pressure on the page is uneven. His letters T indicate a leader who often needs reassurance. He crosses high, but there is often double crossing out in the text. The letters K show that he is not primarily a theoretician, but if he agrees with an idea, an excellent implementer of it. He is really at home in implementation. His letter M is very rare type. Unlike most people, the second of the two arcs of the M is the smaller. This indicates that work and the environment are his priority and that family takes a back seat. And here I can show you a zoom in his T's and K's. I think that the graphologist's conclusion about Komoly's writing confirms the historian's conclusions based on own sources. Otto Komoly did his best to help as many people as possible. His colleagues had difficulty persuading him to move into the Ritz Hotel in December, which they thought was safer than his apartment. On the 1st of January 1945, according to his wife's recollection, 2 civilian detectives with an armed Arch Cross movement appeared at the hotel. They took him away for an hour for questioning. However, Otto Komoly never returned. The circumstances of his murder remain unclear. And this is the closing image of my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much. This career seems to be similarly dramatic, and because we managed time well, we can have a Q&A session of approximately 15 minutes. Well, I didn't want to raise my question first, but in connection with the Margit Schlachter presentation, there was another nun. Her name started with a B, and József Széchenyi historian, who was a librarian also, and I'm sure that his name is also known. So he delivered a lecture on her, and he's also had a publication, and I don't know whether our speaker would like to add something about this other nun who also saved rescued Jews, or we shall have enough, I mean, the publication of Széchenyi, which was published around 10 years ago. She was Rózsa Katalin Péter, I think she's the one you referred to. There was a book published this September, the title is Időablakok, Time Windows. Eva Péter is the editor of this book. If you read this volume, you will have more deeper information about her. In my presentation, I focused on Margit Schlachter. I simply noted that several other nuns participated in the rescue of Jews. However, in this volume I refer to, you can read various stories about this other nun. Thank you.
What are your impressions of Schlachter Margit's assessment of the positioning of the Catholic hierarchy of the bishops in 44? Did she feel that she was in tension with the overall position of the institution, or did she feel supported by the hierarchy?
I think principally for Margaret Schlachter was important to save the lives of people who were persecuted. So, for example, once he cooperated, not once, but more times, of course, but also with the nuncios through Gennaro Verolino, for example. So she was also in connection with the hierarchy. But the first thing, the principal thing for her was to save the lives of people. So when there was a razzia, she was there. Tehát amikor Schlachter Margit, igen, magyarul is mondom, tehát amikor Schlachter Margit
the speaker repeats the same message in Hungarian.
Akkor ő együttműködött nagyon szívesen például Angelo Rotta nunciussal is. Egy alkalommal például Angelo Rotta nunciusnak a segítsége Gennaro Verolino volt szintén jelen egy ilyen razzia alkalmából, és sikerült elérni, hogy ne vigyék el az embereket. Tehát Schlachter Margit együttműködött.
So Margit Schlachter did cooperate with everyone as a rescuer. However, what was primarily important of her not to take away the people. I sincerely hope that this was an answer to your question. Any further questions? If no, then thank you very much for the two speakers of their presentations.